Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the Sitara seminar series. Today with us we have Dr. Brahmanand Mohanty sir. He is an independent energy and resource management specialist. He has also been serving the French Agency for Ecological Transition as its regional advisor for Asia since 1991. He was associated with the Asian Institute of Technology, Bangkok from 1986 to 2020 as a faculty in the Department of Energy, Environment and Climate Change. He has undertaken short-term professional assignments for bilateral and multilateral development agencies during the last 3 decades in some 25 countries, which include Asia, but also in the Middle East, Africa, and the Mediterranean region. He obtained his doctorate in energy from the Institut National Polytechnique from France in 1985. On behalf of the Sitara family, I welcome you, sir. And now we can start with the session. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your introduction. I understand I have about 35 minutes, and I will try to cover this subject, and I look forward to some questions and discussion session after my presentation. The topic I have chosen is access to affordable energy and key to sustainable rural development. Keeping in mind the type of activities that you are doing at Sitara, your main focus is on how to improve the life of people in the rural areas, bringing in technology. So I would not emphasize too much on the technology aspects because you all are already looking into those more in detail. I would try to give an overall view and a perspective of how one can integrate the different aspects together to address the issue. So to start with, I will try to make a linkage between my main focus is on energy. So some of you may be familiar with the Lorentz curve of energy and income inequity in the world. It shows in this graph, the green color represents the final energy consumption. On the x-axis, it is the cumulative percentage of global population. And on the y-axis is the cumulative percent of global appropriation. How much is the share of final energy use? The blue one shows the GDP, gross domestic product, in taking into account the purchasing parity, and the green one is final energy. All of you are familiar with this Pareto principle. Typically, 20% of the population accounting for 80%, or the other way around, 80% accounting for 20%. So you can see in this graph, electricity consumption, 80% of the world's population accounting for little over 20% of the electricity use. So there is a huge disparity. You can see the rest 20% accounts for 80%. And that is at the world level. This is another graph which shows the per capita carbon emission. Carbon emission is linked with human activities. This is the figure that is obtained for India. I came across this in a journal article January this year, where they talk about how much is the per capita carbon emission. Carbon emission is linked with various activities. This is for households, Indian households. It is linked with food, electricity, gas, other types of energies, public transportation, private transportation, medical care, education, all that we can think of, that the way we consume different commodities to improve our quality of life. So you can see the average carbon footprint is about 0.56 tons of carbon dioxide per person per year. You know, statistics does not necessarily tell everything. On one side, we have the bottom 20%, which whose earning capacity is less than $2 a day. They account for about 0.19, less than 0.2 tons of carbon dioxide per person per year. On the other extreme, you have top 20%, which produces about 1.32 tons. That's about almost 7 times more than the bottom 20%. Now, these numbers, again, when I talk about top 20%, 20% of the population, that's almost 1.4 billion. Okay, so we're talking about a huge number, 700 million people are grouped there. That means in that group, we'll find all of us who are attending this seminar would be mostly in this particular bracket of top 20%. Okay, so you can see there is a diversity of the consumption. The bottom 20% consuming very little amount, where the average is about 0.56. Why does the bottom 20% consume so much less or emit so much less? Okay, we're all, of course, concerned about how do you bring down the carbon emission in the world, but at the same time, making sure that there is an equitable distribution of the growth and equitable distribution of carbon emissions in different parts of the world, different continents. In India itself, we can see there is a lot of diversity. On an average, India may have a very low figure because of our past trends. But as all of us are aware, we are growing very fast and the consumption is going up. And that's not necessarily because of the bottom 20% or 40%. It's more the top 20% consuming more and more. And this is linked with the wealth pyramid that we have. Okay? And you can, this is the figure for 2017, because there is always a gap between the surveys that are done and the results that come out. This is the figure for 2017 from Credit Suisse Global Wealth Report. It shows that 770 million people, okay, which represents about, these are adults, adult population, which represents about 92% of the total adult population, which accounts for less than $10,000 wealth. Whereas on the top, we have 760 who are greater than, who own more than $100 million. Again, these numbers don't say much because, you know, today I think the report has come out that the richest person in India also happens to be the richest person in Asia Pacific, accounting for something like $84 billion. Okay, so that represents, you can calculate easily how many people at the bottom of the pyramid are equivalent to the wealth of one person in India. So because of this low consumption, low income, low wealth, the people at the bottom of the pyramid are not able to consume much and meet their basic needs. And that's where the problem lies. All of you are familiar with the Sustainable Development Goals, which have been set for all countries to achieve by 2030. And the goal 7 is all about energy. How do you ensure access to affordable, reliable, sustainable, and modern energy for all? So these words are very carefully chosen: affordable, reliable, sustainable, and modern energy. Okay, and we can see why these words are chosen because of the past history that we have had. Okay, when it is affordable, it may not be reliable, it may not be sustainable, and it may not be something which is convenient for people to use. The two key indicators of energy poverty, the first one is lack of access to grid electricity. Now, India has improved a lot in the last 1 or 2 decades. We've actually improved a lot. As you know, the present government has a target of reaching out to every household which would have electricity. A recent study which was done in 2020 showed that 97% of Indian households have actually access to grid electricity. Okay, so that's a phenomenal improvement compared to the past that we have had. But that again does not tell us everything, because when 97% of the Indian households have access, 64% of rural households do not have regular power supply. Okay, they face power cuts at least once a day. Okay, so that means more than 2/3 of the people in the rural areas do not have access to reliable electricity supply. And very often this reliable supply is cut off when there is a need for it, because the demand in the urban areas are much more. And these areas which are less populated, less dense, and far away from the cities are very often the victims of power cuts compared to the urban households. But even in the urban households, you can see the statistics that many people in the urban households also do not have access to electricity on a regular basis. The other aspect is the traditional use of biomass for cooking. Here again, the government has been trying very hard to make sure that people have access to modern forms of energy. Still about 50% of Indians depend on biomass for cooking for various reasons. Uh, they don't have access to it. They cannot afford even to replace the gas cylinders. Okay, and the number of premature deaths in India with air pollution is very, very high. We're talking about 1.5 million people. This is every year, 1.5 million premature deaths because of air pollution. Again, you can compare this with COVID, which is making much more news. The number of people who have died of COVID compared to the premature deaths that take place every year due to air pollution. And much of it is due to fumes of solid biomass fuels, which are the major contributor due to the cooking activities in households. Now, I'm sure all of you are familiar with this particular slide. Energy is consumed for various developmental activities. And here I've classified the four main ones, which is health, education, income, employment opportunities, and environmental benefits. So energy can provide these four key benefits through the services that it delivers. Okay, health, when you use the right type of energy, you can reduce the exposure to hazardous pollutants. You can reduce the drudgery because people have to walk long distances to collect the fuels, solid fuels. Okay, and that can help them to improve their health. Okay, and electricity, as you know, is helping us to keep the vaccine safe and reach out the medicine in rural areas. Education, studying at night is important. Again, when you have modern energy facilities, then you have less drudgery and you have more time for studying. Okay, and thanks to the access to information and communication technology today, there is a narrowing down of digital divide that we have in the society. Though we are becoming acutely aware of the digital divide that is there at present times, COVID times, because many people still do not have access to reliable quality of ICT facilities. Income generation, I'll come to that more in detail. You can see that instead of doing manual labor, using animals, when you mechanize things, you can increase your productivity and you can have more entrepreneurship to create jobs. And especially in rural areas, you can have many small scale energy generation capacities to develop the local industry, because very often the raw materials produced in the rural areas are transported to urban areas. And as a result, there is a loss of productivity as well as loss of income opportunities in the rural context. Environment, I don't need to talk much about it because we are all aware of the impact of fossil fuel use uh, on the local and the global environment. Now, when you talk about path of energy sustainability, because that's the topic that I've fixed in for today. When you talk about path to energy sustainability, I'm talking about three key steps. The first one is energy poverty. We saw that because of energy poverty, people are not able to consume enough to improve their quality of life. It's a vicious circle. Because of that, they cannot earn enough. And because they're poor, they don't have the opportunity to use adequate amount of energy. Okay. So the first thing that we need to look at is how do you ensure that there is energy sufficiency, particularly at the base of the pyramid. People have enough access to energy that is required for their day-to-day life, not only for the improving their quality of life, but also for productive activities, which will provide them more opportunity for generating income. Once we have sufficiency, then we need to also look at how you can move away from energy inefficiency to energy efficiency. We don't realize how inefficient our present energy systems are. Okay? I could give you many examples. Okay? Just to give a simple example, you can see that in the last few years, Indian households have moved away from the incandescent bulb to light emitting diode lamps, LED lamps. Incandescent bulb typically, I'm sure most of you are aware, about 10%, 10 to 12% of energy that is provided in the form of electricity is actually converted into light. The rest of it is all converted into heat. Okay, so we're talking about electricity that is available at home, but for that electricity to reach us at home, it has already undergone transformation right from the coal field to the power plant. In the power plant itself, the power plant efficiency is typically of the order of 30 to 35%. So 65% is lost there. So if you add up all these losses, only about 3 to 5% of the energy in the primary form, that is coal or oil, is actually delivered in the form of lighting. So there is a huge loss in the whole chain. So how do you address this energy inefficiency and go for more energy efficiency solutions? And the third one is, how do you move away from fossil fuels to alternatives, renewable energies, which are more environment friendly, okay, and which are renewable because they will not uh, be depleted with time, as is the case with fossil energy. So these are the three steps that we need to look into, not individually, but all together in a holistic manner. How do we address both 1, 2, and 3 together? And when we can do these three together, we will be moving towards more energy efficiency, energy sustainability. Just to give you an example, as an illustration, till last decade, most of the governments were subsidizing kerosene because kerosene was the main form of energy for rural population, both for lighting as well as cooking. As we know, kerosene is a very poor form of energy for lighting because the amount of light that we get is very, very minimal compared to the energy that it goes in the form of fossil fuel. So when you change from kerosene lamp to a simple light, it could be an incandescent bulb, there's already a huge factor of improvement. I'll come with these numbers later on. Then we have seen how people have moved from incandescent bulb to LED lamp, and we're talking about a factor of 5 or 6 improvements. So 6 times improvement when you switch from incandescent bulb to light emitting diodes. And finally, instead of using diesel generators or any fossil power plant, when you move on to solar panels, okay, we can reduce the emissions. At the same time, we are ensuring that there is a continuous supply of energy for years to come, for ages to come. So this is showing us how we move away from kerosene to lamps and then adapt efficiency. And because of adopting efficiency, our need on the supply side, because the 1 and 2 are more on the demand side, when we manage to reduce our demand through the right choice of technology, okay, and making sure that we have enough to meet the need for the poorest of the poor, then we can think about how do you go for supply side to meet that. It's much easier for us. We don't need to put a big generation facility somewhere else. And solar panels today on our rooftop can do the same thing. Now, before I go into more details, we need to understand why it is more important to focus on the poor. Because unfortunately, the societal system is such, the poor always pay much more compared to the rich. The people in the rural areas pay much more compared to the people in the urban areas for an equivalent energy service. When I talk about energy service, I'm not talking about kilowatt hour, I'm not talking about liter. I'm talking about the service that is delivered in terms of lighting, in terms of transportation, moving a kilometer, in terms of cooling, heating, etc. Okay? We have seen urban households consider investment to switch from an inefficient to efficient lamps expensive. And this was the case till the government actually intervened in the last few years, where the lamps prices have come down drastically. But before that, people did not go for it in the urban context because the price at which we get electricity in the urban context is very low. We don't have to make the capital investment on the supply side. We get it at a reasonable price. And so we don't really care. We don't really want to invest more on an efficient lamp because the capital cost is high. We prefer to pay it in a small amount on a monthly basis. On the other hand, the rural households also have the same problem. They go for kerosene lamp because every day they can spend a very small quantity of money to have access to kerosene for lighting. And if they have to change to LED lamp, they need to have a capital investment, which they don't have in their pocket. Okay? But if you look at the delivery of an equivalent energy service, kerosene lamp, okay, if you start with a 10 watts LED as the reference, okay, energy service which is delivered equal to 1, to deliver the same energy service, 50 watts incandescent lamp, you require 5, the cost becomes 5 times more. And in the case of kerosene lamp, the cost increases 600 times for the same amount of energy delivery. Okay? We need to understand that kerosene lamp, as I said, very little light, lot of it is heat. 99%, 9%, 99.9% is all heat, less than 1% is light, whereas in the case of incandescent bulb, I talked about 10 to 12%, whereas in LED it's higher, it's not 100%, but it's much higher. So you can see there's a factor of 1 to 600 when we switch from kerosene lamp to 10 watts LED. But the problem is poor people do not have the money to buy this LED lamp in the first place. In the urban context, as you know, the government tries to keep the price of electricity very reasonable for households. And every time there is a price hike, people shout. Typically, we are paying, depending on the cities, anything between 5 to 10 rupees maximum. In a big city like Mumbai, you might be paying much higher for the higher consumers. Okay, let's say 5 to 10 rupees, okay, per kilowatt hour. We'll do a very simple calculation to see what happens in the context of villages, which do not have access to grid electricity to listen to radio. Obviously, since they don't have access to electricity, they would go for batteries. And these are simple AA or AAA batteries, small batteries. And all of us know that these batteries typically would cost us anything between, 2 batteries would cost us about 30 rupees. Okay? If you do a simple calculation, the energy content of these 2 batteries is hardly 3 watt hour. That means the cost per watt hour is 10 rupees. And if you talk about a 1 kilowatt hour of battery, that's equivalent to 10,000 rupees per kilowatt hour. Okay? So a villager would use electricity for listening to radio, pays 10,000 rupees per kilowatt hour. Whereas in the urban context, the maximum that we'd be paying is about 10 rupees. So there is a factor 10,000 between what the urbanites pay compared to a rural person pays for the same amount of energy to get the energy service, listening to radio in this case. Okay? So when you compare energy services, we'll find that poor people, and particularly those who do not have access to grid quality electricity, are paying much higher rate. And there is scope for improvement because we would be able to use the technology. And later on, we'll see not only just the technology, but the ways to deliver it to reduce the price. A rural person, instead of paying 10,000 rupees per kilowatt hour, if you can bring down to less than, let's say, 100 rupees a kilowatt hour by bringing solar panels, that is already an improvement of factor 100. Okay, but we have to understand that a rural person does not consume a kilowatt hour as easily as an urban household. Okay? And that's where the difference lies. You have to see how to make sure that there is sufficiency and not overdo it, as it's the case with many of the government programs. They would like to give access to electricity to make the rural context the same as the urban one. And it's just not possible because we do not have enough resources. Another example is, if you go for central grid, average price of electricity, let's say urban households would pay about 5 rupees. If you have areas where the grid quality is not good enough, you go for mini grid using diesel generators. Today, the diesel price is about, let's say, 90 rupees a liter. And typically with a diesel generator, you can get about small size, mini grid size. You can get about 3 to 3.5 units of electricity per liter of diesel. So the price would be about 30 rupees a kilowatt hour. We can discuss about these numbers, but these are just ballpark numbers to get an idea. Whereas we have seen just now, off-grid electricity, if you talk about dry cell batteries, it's 10,000 rupees. So there is scope to reduce from 10,000 rupees to somewhere between 5 to 30 rupees by switching over to cleaner options, only when we know exactly how much is the requirement and find the right solution. Now, energy poverty is one issue, but we need to go beyond the energy poverty alleviation, because energy poverty would maybe alleviated by making sure that there is sufficiency. But sufficiency is not enough because they need to have more activities. Okay, economic activities. Without economic activities, there won't be enough revenue generation to improve the quality of life. Okay, so in the past we have had mostly the government programs were there, what we call the no business ecosystem, where there was no efforts to make cost recovery, 100% subsidies, 80% subsidy, 70% subsidy, etc. And these subsidies were so high. Okay, just to give you an example, I was looking at the numbers in the case of Lakshadweep Islands. All of you are familiar with Lakshadweep Islands, and there the government spends roughly about 24 rupees to supply a kilowatt hour, whereas the recovery rate is about 4 rupees. So for every kilowatt hour which is supplied to the people, the islanders, there is a subsidy of 20 rupees. Okay, so that is the type of numbers that we are going through, and we haven't looked at ways by which we can change it in a manner that people can afford to. First thing, we have not chosen the right type of solutions to bring down. Why should it be 24 rupees a kilowatt hour? As we know that solar prices are coming down almost every year. So there's no reason for us to still use diesel generators, diesel which is taken from the mainland through boats to through ships to the island, stored and then used in inefficient diesel generators to produce them for the islanders, and the distances are not much. Next is gradually we have seen as the density increases, the population density increases in an area when they're less dilapidated, there is possibility of starting some social businesses by which you can achieve break-even conditions. And that's where you can see in the rural context, there are small businesses which are coming up where they barely manage to break even by providing services to the rural population. But if you apply these ideas together, you create a good business ecosystem where there is a motivation to gain profit. Okay, you can have various types of service provision depending on the requirements. Understand what are the key requirements of the people for which they can pay because they're already paying very high amount. You can target those and provide reliable services, and you can create business opportunities. Government has been doing this, especially in the last 2 decades. The national governments have realized that they have to go away from this subsidy culture to find new ways to address the energy poverty as well as energy sustainability issues. There's a lot of activities which are taking place in different areas, but very often they are done in a piecemeal basis. Okay, there are different ministries addressing different types of problems. You have Ministry of Rural Development, you have Ministry of Energy, Ministry of Renewable Energy Sources, okay, Ministry of Transport, but they're all working on a silo basis, and there is no efforts to bring them together to see in what way they can provide solutions. Fortunately, we have had dynamism in the private sector, particularly NGOs have been very active to find solutions in the rural context, and they've set up good business models which can be replicated by the private sector, keeping in mind that it should be win-win. The private sector wins, but at the same time, the rural population also should be winning. Otherwise, there's no business opportunity for them. Unfortunately, government has not really achieved enough because there are some avoidable flaws in the model itself. For example, the time factor. The government comes up with unrealistic targets. Within a year, you would like to achieve so many numbers. So the focus is more on numbers, not on the quality, okay? Not on looking at after-sale issues. How do you ensure that there is the technology is available, the people are there to make sure that the technology performs once it is sold. Okay? So it is basically installed at the last moment to meet the yearly targets. Okay? And there are no evaluation of how the system works in the long run, and if there are ways by which we can provide support to make things work for a longer time. Again, the target is again, how do you reach out to more people? We have had cases of government trying to reach out to 100% of the villages in terms of grid electricity supply without really looking at the economics of it. Is it always necessary for us to extend the grid to those levels? Can we find decentralized solutions which are much more cost effective? We haven't looked at those options. Okay? And the means that are used very often, we use technologies or devices where we look at the first cost, which is the lowest cost, so that we can reach out to more people. Very often, uh, good technologies which are long lasting may have some additional first cost. Okay? It's a little bit like the tip of the iceberg. The initial investment is like the tip of the iceberg. What is lying at the bottom of the sea is about 8 to 9 times bigger than what we see at this as the tip of the iceberg. So when you make our decision looking at the tip of the iceberg, the running costs are very high, operational costs are very high. As a result, uh, people get things free of cost. There are many rural households which may be getting solar systems at very highly subsidized prices, but they just don't have enough money to replace the batteries when they come to the end of their lives, because again, the batteries are chosen not to be the most efficient one in the market. And there is no facilities provided to improve the quality of services that are delivered at the local level. Now, just to give you an example, many of you must be aware about the initiative of the Ministry of Power with the Energy Efficiency Services Limited. They have really transformed the market of lighting. This is the dashboard. I've taken the snapshot of it today, 7th April. 367 millions of lamps have been replaced. Okay, so a lot of positives. You can see impressive achievements because the lighting market has been transformed. The price of LED bulbs have really come down through these programs. They have avoided the need for new power plants, the need for fossil fuel, and the carbon emissions. And for the end users, because of using these lamps, they can reduce the electricity use and they can save money. So all these are positive benefits. But if you look at the downsides, there are quite a few. It's a monopoly. The whole system is done in such a manner that we are bypassing the existing network of the distribution network, the suppliers, manufacturers to distributors to local area, where when you have distributors, you also have people who know how to repair things. And that is not there because it's directly done by one entity. So it's a monopoly, ignoring the existing market players. As a result, as long as the government program works, it's all right. The moment the government program stops, everything will come down to zero because the private sector has not really picked up. And if you go to the market, the prices still are quite high compared to the government scheme by which they're giving it at a much lower price. Again, one size fits all. You will find that 1 wattage of light, irrespective of whether you use it in the living room, in the dining area, in the kitchen, in toilets, or outdoor. The wattage is the same, the color is the same. We don't have that option that we have in the market. And after sales services, you would not know whom to go and ask for any defective products. Unlike if you bought it in the local market, you can always go back to the vendor and say that it's not working, I need a replacement. So sustainability becomes an issue. Though we have had market transformation, there are lots of drawbacks in the system. We need to look at how to mobilize the right type of mechanisms by which the private players, those who are already in the field, they bring in these changes and reach out to the people at the same level. So that brings us to the notion of how do you go away from selling products to more of what we call product service approach, which is also known as servitization. That requires a paradigm shift. We are not selling anymore. It's not like you go to the market, buy something, and that's the end of our relationship between the vendor and the users. How do you create a long-term relationship, like a marriage between those who are supplying the product and those who are using it? So we move from product-oriented market to product-oriented services, and further you go to user-oriented services, and finally you come to a point where you have a long-term agreement between the supplier and the users. And to do that, you cannot do it in a centralized manner. You need to bring it down to decentralized manner. You need to have local supply, so you can train up the local people to provide services and make sure that service is delivered. So which means I do not need to buy any more product, whether it is a lamp, whether it's a motor, whether it's a vehicle. I do not need to buy any more. I just pay for the services that is rendered to me. So somebody else is taking care of it. Okay, so servitization basically is looking at functionality over ownership. We don't need to own anymore because the first cost is high. Somebody else takes care of the first cost, and we only get the benefits in terms of using for the services that are required. Repair and warranty are taken care because there is an extended product's useful life. As a result, the manufacturer or the supplier takes care, makes sure that things don't break down. If things break down, there's no service delivered, there's no service delivered, the user is not going to make any payment. So we come up with the rental and leasing options, and these are starting gradually in the urban context. As you can see, companies like Ola, Uber are already providing this type of services for transportation. We could think of the same type of models in the rural context. So pay-as-you-go models that are coming up in renewable energy, for example, solar. There are some companies already looking at pay-as-you-go mechanisms. Okay, so you pay for the results. You don't just buy it. If you buy something which is cheap, it breaks down after a year. You don't know what to do with it. So now I talk about how do you bring servitization to benefit the rural population. Okay, so we're talking about not big farmers. We're talking about marginalized farmers who have very small plots of land, and anything that they buy, the cost is very high for them. So how do you have business models by which you allow them to focus on their main line of competence, that is farming, and anything else that is required? They require water, they require fertilizer, they require mechanized tools, etc. You just provide those services, and they don't need to buy this equipment and maintain them. So how do you create an ecosystem to bring them out of this perpetual need for buying things and which are wasted? Okay, so instead of just selling technologies, entrepreneurs can look at new models like pumping as a service. Instead of asking them to buy a pump, you provide them water as and when it's required, and they pay for it. And as a result, you can move the pump from one farm to another. With one pump, you can take care of, let's say, 50 different farmers instead of just putting one pump for each farm. Similarly, you can go for drying as serving, cooling as service, etc. Okay? So how do you create that market linkages so that by purchasing the farm outputs, you can help them to recover the capital through the value additions? So entrepreneur is not looking at getting big amount of money from the services, but you are also creating a market linkage. When they produce it, you create the market from the rural areas to urban areas, by which you are assisting farmers to disseminate their products in the market at the right price, which the farmer is, a small marginalized farmer is very often not able to do. I think I've run out of time. There are many examples. I don't need to go into these examples. Many of them you are aware of them. Just an example of like the solar drying. Okay, many products get spoiled because of the shelf life is limited, and when the production is high during a certain season, instead of throwing them away or selling it at a dirt cheap price, now there are companies, entrepreneurs who are helping them to provide dryers to the marginal farmers who are able to dry the products, and they are helping them to market it at a reasonable price in the urban context, by which they're able to get back the initial capital investment on the dryers. At the same time, the farmer is getting a healthy profit compared to the price they would have sold at a very rock bottom price during the seasonal different seasons. The same thing is done for cold storage. It's picking up slowly. How do you address with the perishable products, and how do you improve the market value by shifting during the period when there is a shortage of products in the market and people are ready to pay a higher price? Okay, and of course there is no distress selling because of the farmers. The cases of farmers who are just distributing the products because they don't know how to sell it at a very low price compared to the price at which they produce it. I would like to conclude by just talking about the path of energization. If you start from the bottom, we need to focus more on the productive use and not just taking care of the basic requirements. Of course, we start with basic requirements with lighting, water, communication, etc. But we need to look at education, healthcare, economic activities. But for all these things, we need to first start with productive activities, because the productivity activities will allow the farmer to increase their revenue, generate more revenue through which they can take care of the basic services. And as they go up in the ladder of pyramid, the energy pyramid, they're able to have advanced services, okay, take care of education, healthcare, and other economic activities, etc. So with this, I've really overshot my time. The government needs to work not in isolation, help more, encourage more entrepreneurship in rural context, so that farmers in the rural areas are able to produce, focus more attention on their main line of activities, and generate sufficient revenue by creating the market linkage by which they can improve their quality of life. So to conclude, I would like to say energy sustainability is not just one aspect. We need to ensure that poor people have access to enough, and that enough has to be defined according to the requirement at which level of the pyramid, the ladder they are in, and then look at how do you bring in efficiency, because we have seen there is a lot of scope for improvement in efficiency in our present systems, and very often we continue to have inefficient systems because the policies that are in place in terms of subsidies, hidden subsidies which are given. And finally, there is scope for us to go away from fossil fuel to renewable energies, particularly in decentralized areas where the grid supply is very onerous. At the same time, we are not able to provide grid supply in a very reliable manner. Thank you very much for your attention. I'm ready to take any questions or answer any doubts that you may have in the presentation.
Thank you, sir. Participants can raise their hands and we'll take the questions in the same order. Shah, sir.
Yeah, I think it's almost like my prerogative to raise my hand fast and ask my question to the speaker, the first one. Brahmanand, as you gave examples of servitization, the principle that you talked about of, in urban areas about Ola and Uber, like that, the services of, drying, cooling, preservation, using sort of, extending shelf life and all that. Is there any example of servitization in rural areas, like, pumping on, hire or so? We know about this tractor hiring and all that, but these, the other services that you talked about, is there any good example that one can cite?
Yes, there are presently, there are a few, the handful, not many, because the overall ecosystem is not ready. Government policies are such, very often they discourage, because when the government brings in subsidy, the business model doesn't work very well. But there are a couple of companies, and in fact, in my slides, I skipped over them because I didn't have time. There are at least two companies who are already looking at how to provide water as a service, okay, for irrigation. So the farmer does not need to do this. I was involved in a project some time back in 2013-14 in Odisha, where an NGO called Harsha Trust had started looking at this. The idea was to employ the rural youth, help them, and they would take a loan from the local bank and bring solar panels on their bicycle. They would go to a small farmer. These farmers have, very small plots. These are in the tribal areas where they have very, very small plots and they depend on seasonal rain. So throughout the year, they cannot produce anything because there is not enough water available for them. So they would produce typically during a particular season of 3 or 4 months, and the rest of the year, there is no activity for them. So these youth would go from one farmer to another and pump the water that is required. But the whole idea was not only look at the pumping with solar, but also look at how do you minimize the water need. So we started off by a whole package. The youth will help them to bring in drip irrigation, for instance. They would provide a tank so they can store this water, and they use an efficient pump so that your panel size is very small, which can be easily carried with bicycle. So doing that, they could increase the revenue of these tribal farmers by 3 to 4 times, and they could pay back at higher rate, and the solar panels could be, the initial investment on this whole system could be recovered within 3 to 4 years' time. So the banks were ready to give loans, but this has to be scaled up. The problem is very often the government comes in with scheme, for example, providing grid electricity. People get excited, they don't want to use it. But as we have seen, 60%, 64% of the rural household, this was a survey done last year, do not have access to reliable electricity. This is one example. There are other examples. I talked about Dryer. This is a company in Mumbai, which has a young startup, which has been providing dryers to farmers and getting good quality, particularly the farm products which cannot be sold in the market because their look is not good. They may be good products, but the look is not good. People don't buy it. They would dry this product and they're selling it at a higher price through the distribution chain in big firms that are now providing this facility in the urban context. Okay? There are many other examples. Cooling is also being developed slowly because we know that cold storage is again in different areas, the requirements at different times. If you put one cold storage in one place, it may not be used optimally. So the idea is how to move it from one place to another, small enough to take care of the requirement of the people over a certain period of time. So there again, there are 3 or 4 companies which are there. I could give you all the details. In the presentation, there are some references there.
Yeah, please share with us. And just last remark that I would like to make from my end is I knew of Dr. Brahmanand 15 years back when I visited his house in Pondicherry. He's somebody who believed that charity must start at home, and you had a rooftop solar photovoltaic. So just please tell us, our young students, that does it work and how long it has worked, and what is the story?
Well, I mean, it's again the whole story. Whatever, as you rightly said, I believe in practicing what I preach. And first I try it out, and if I succeed, then only I talk about it. Okay, so I can be very emphatic in what I say because I have already tested it myself. So when we constructed the house 20 years back, I had made it a point that we would go for renewable energy right from the beginning. So those days, of course, there was no grid connectivity, so we had to go for batteries. Batteries still remains the weakest link, and the initial investment is high. The idea was, how do you reduce the energy use? And I really looked around in the market. We didn't have any labels those days, no star rating of products. I'm talking about 2000, 2001. So in 2001, I've got the first electric car. And we used all appliances, the best appliances which are available in the market, by which we could reduce our energy requirement to the lowest level. We designed the house in such a manner, daytime, I don't need lighting. You must have noticed that I just switched on my light now because it's getting dark, but otherwise till 6 o'clock in the evening, I don't need to have any lighting anywhere in the whole house. Okay? And even now, the light that I'm using is hardly 3 to 4 watts. And that takes care of my requirement in studying. I don't need to light up a big lamp. So this is the example I was trying to give you earlier. 2010, when the government started, central government started talking about grid interactive systems, we decided to go for our own solar plant, which will be connected to the grid. Obviously, in that time in Pondicherry, where I live, there was no regulation for that. So I discussed with the local authorities, both electricity company as well as the government bureaucrats. And I said, I'll use my house as a guinea pig so that you can see it works. So this system at present that we have is working since 2011. This is the 10th year is going on. And for the last 10 years, we have not had any electricity bill. In fact, we produce about 30 to 35% more electricity than we consume. And that takes care of all the household requirements plus our transportation. We haven't been to any petrol station in the last 2 decades almost, because we use charging of cars at home, scooter at home, everything is done at home. And we have switched over to cooking. Again, one of the IIT alumni produces the solar cookers, which are very impressive, very efficient. We have been using the solar cooker. And when required, we use microwave, which is again running with solar electricity. So we have minimized the need for gas to the extent possible for cooking purposes. So this is again an example of how do you choose the right type of fuels to meet your requirements so that we can avoid the need for fossil fuel to the extent possible. I think there was coverage in Better India sometime back, I think 2 years back. Those who are interested to know more in details can definitely just Google search my name and Better India, you can find the details there.
Yeah, thanks, Brahmanand. Yeah, please share your slides, and if somebody is interested, we'll sort of let them take a look at it. Yeah, thank you. Abhinav, I'm done with my.
Yes, sir. Priya ma'am.
Yeah, hi, Dr. Mohanty. That was a really nice talk. I was just curious, since I work in energy for irrigation, I'm interested to know about that model about carrying pumps and solar PV panels. What was the size of that pump?
This was very small because these were marginalized farmers, and they typically have, what they call about 1/4 of an acre. Each farm would have about 1/4 of an acre, and it just didn't work out for them to put solar. And first thing, it was not optimized in the way it was used. So typically it was designed to have 2 solar panels of 100 watts each, and a small Lawrence pump, which is very, very efficient. Okay, and this pump will be carried by the people put in the well, and according to the height, it take care of it. So 2 young people could move around with the cycle, go from one farmer to other, and take care of it. Obviously, to scale it up, there have been new models, and the example that I have given you in the slides, you would see, is one of the bigger companies which is doing it now. And they come with, of course, with the motorized vehicle. They can open up the panels and provide much greater quantity of energy for pumping. Not only pumping, when there's no need for pumping, they can also use that same electricity for mechanical activities, for example, grinding and other things in the rural context.
Yeah, no, very nice. Thank you.
Satish, sir.
Hi, Brahmanand.
Hi.
So we are meeting once again. So
Can I see your face, please?
Yeah, certainly. I hope you are able to place me.
Yes, of course. I remember you very well.
Yes. So just to share a secret with the audience, Brahmanand, chief scientist of Orissa Renewable Energy Development Agency, who could not become one, because when I had proposed his name as a chief scientist of ORIDA, there are 2 questions which are asked to me. One by our additional secretary. He said, "Are you okay as a CEO if he gets more salary than you do?" I said, "Yes," because I said, I'm from a cadre. I have a fixed scale. Meri to salary badhegi as and when badhegi. So that was one. The second person, who was a senior scientist in the department, he observed very cryptically. He said, and Brahmanand would appreciate that remark. He said, "वो बहुत young बच्चा है, मैंने टोका लो करते, मतलब इतने young आदमी को इतनी salary कैसे देंगे?" So I told everybody, I said, अब solar PV के area में मैं बूढ़े आदमी को कहाँ से लाऊंगा? You will have only youngsters who will be there. And then much later, when I went to Puducherry, I asked Dr. Chamanlal Gupta. I said, "You remember Brahmanand?" He said, "Milna hai usse." And I said, "Yes, is he here?" And that is where I went to his house and saw the solar plant on the top. But on a other note, I just wanted to check out with you.
Yes.
That this grid feeding rules, have they become easier in Puducherry or Tamil Nadu, or do they still create irritation for a user? That was one. And second thing is, there are a lot of tribal pockets where the dug wells, which they have, are what we call the slow recharge dug well.
Yes.
So these tribals, typically, if they get a 5 HP pump, the well dries up very fast, and then they have to again wait for, whatever, 12 or 24 hours for the whole recharge to come. So many of them observe that the solar pumping is kind of compatible with their both resource and need. So would you think this kind of a tribal pocket will be a good idea for this hired pump of yours that you're talking about? There's 2 questions of mine.
Yes. Thank you for your questions. And I'm really sorry that I took time to, connect the dots. This because you're talking about, I think, 30 years back or more.
Yeah. No, the other one, Puducherry, was, I think, 2011 when I was Director General.
Orida case was.
Orida is 1984.
Yeah. So
yeah. When you and I don't know whether
just came back from France.
No, I wonder whether Professor Shah has mentioned this. If correct me if I'm wrong, he got the award for the best PhD thesis written by a non-French scholar. Correct me if I'm wrong.
That's right. That was in 1985. That's a long time back. To get back to your question, the first one you talked about, the regulation. I had the privilege actually to be part of the team to assist the Regulatory Commission to formulate the rules for Puducherry. And we actually brought in something very interesting. We brought in something called group net metering. As you may be aware that I am associated with the Sri Aurobindo Ashram very closely. And ashram has many buildings. And keeping that in mind, right from the beginning, we try to see how to ensure that, some buildings are exposed to the sun, some buildings do not have rooftop which are open to the sky. Okay, the trees, shading, etc. So keeping that in mind, we proposed something which was accepted by the Regulatory Commission. So I think Puducherry is the only, or the Regulatory Commission of Puducherry and other union territories. There is a difference compared to the others, that it allows us to have group net metering. If I have another property somewhere else, my excess I can offset the energy consumption in another building.
I see. That's excellent.
And we actually proved it by the school where I went to. The school actually produces 3 times the energy it consumes using the same principle where Professor Chamalal Gupta teaches.
Yeah.
The school actually, we worked with the students. I took the lead with the teachers and the students. We replaced all the inefficient appliances, lights, fans, computers, etc. Reduced the demand by about 25% to 28%. And then we went for solar. And we wanted to show to the authorities that it is possible to produce more than what it consumes actually. So the school produces 3 times more energy than it consumes. The remaining amount goes to offset. For example, the ashram has a laundry, which offsets the energy consumption of the laundry, and the dispensary where they have activities, many machines which are operating. So over the years, actually, many buildings have been become energy positive. The library produces 7 times its energy consumption. Some of the guest houses are fully on solar. Okay? All this is possible because of the cooperation we got from the Regulatory Commission. But you're right, when it comes to actual implementation, there are problems at the lower level. It doesn't happen at the high level. Authorities are agreeing with us. The AC of Electricity Department, the Secretary Department of Power, they're all very cooperative. Everything works all right. But when it comes to officials at the lower rank, they try to create many hurdles. But so far, actually, we have had good fortune of actually promoting solar in fairly good manner in this city, particularly in Puducherry where I live. But my focus again has been not only on solar, try to see first how do you reduce the consumption to the extent possible. And something that I didn't talk about is behavioral and lifestyle changes. Okay, for example, we produce 30 to 35% more electricity, which is just given to the grid free of cost. But I would not use air conditioner unless there is a need for it. And I define the need. And when I'm using an air conditioner in the hottest months, I make sure that the fan is running first, and the air conditioner is, the thermostat is set as 28 degrees, 28 to 29 degrees, so that I'm quite comfortable. At the same time, my body is allowed to sweat. So I feel quite all right because the sweat doesn't remain on my body because the air is drier because of the air conditioner. So as a result, the air conditioner consumes much less amount of energy. So this is where you have to define the need first. How do you ensure that the need is taken care of? And not just do it, many people come to the office, whether there is a need or not, they just come and switch on the air conditioner. Same thing they do with the lights. When they come in, they switch on the light. In the daytime, there is more daylight, but they do not switch it off. So how do you make sure that first you reduce and then you look at ways by which you can meet the requirement to the extent possible? Same thing for me, when I move around the town, it's a very small place. I use bicycle. Okay? I don't use a car to move around unless there is a need to carry more people. But most of the time I'm on my bicycle, and that's good enough for me. And that gives me an exercise. I don't need to spend the time in the gym, paying money to go to the gym to keep myself fit. The second question that you had, forgive me, I didn't note down. What was the second question, sir?
That was the low recharge rate dug well.
Yes,
I mean,
definitely it is going to work
recharge.
out.
Yeah.
In fact, again, government comes with the standardization. You had been with Oreda, the government standardizes everything. One size fits all, I mentioned about. Okay, so we have only one type, and in a way, we actually kill the market because the market can come up with many types of products to meet the requirements. When we standardize, there is no scope for innovation. There's no scope for actually finding right solutions. So very often you'll find the systems are oversized.
Yeah.
There's no need for that. When you go for a big pump, how do you come up with the sizes according to the requirement? And as you rightly said, the shallow pumps, these small ones, there was never any complaints because the pumps would pump it slowly and they were stored. And there was enough capacity to take care of the requirement. These boys didn't have to go back every day to the same farmer because there was a storage tank would take care of the requirement over 2 or 3 days. Okay. So again, we have to look at the whole systems finding, as I said, don't look at only the technology aspect, look at what is the actual requirement, what is the availability and how do we good matching and what is the capacity for the party to pay actually. Keeping that in mind, you can come up with very interesting solutions. And this is where I think the young startups, their mind works very well. And with using the ICT, they can actually keep track of many things. As I mentioned, in the urban context, already many things are happening. I can keep track of many things on a day-to-day basis. All the buildings that I talked about, I can keep track of their performances on a real-time basis. In fact, I very often ask the supplier or the vendors to go back and check where there's something which is wrong. I don't have to go to the site to know this. So similarly, people can keep track of this from a distance now and make sure that the things are in running condition. I don't know if I answered your question.
No. Thanks. I mean, yes, this point about oversizing and standardization is very valid because that kills flexibility.
Yes.
So yes, I agree. Thank you.
And we have alternatives. For example, storage. We don't need to go for one storage option. We can have alternative options instead of going for battery storage. If you have water tank, it's much cheaper for you to put a water tank and store water.
Oh yeah.
The same thing for cooling. You can produce ice and keep ice as storage. And it can take care of if you have a couple of days of no sun, you can still maintain the temperature in the cold storage fairly well without having the need to put batteries and making the system more complicated. So we need to look at various options where it is possible and find the appropriate solution to address the issues.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. I must get back in touch with you to learn more about your activities. I know
certainly
Narendra has spoken to me about you because we have not been in direct touch for a long time.
I know.
Are we out of time? I just had a...
Sure, ma'am, we can.
So one thing about the rooftop solar, I think one of the reasons that you face trouble might be, because I know that's true in Maharashtra, grid connected, is because for the utility, it's a loss-making enterprise to give residential consumers with the net metering rates. It's actually a loss-making enterprise for them. So they give pushback at that. Even though the policies might be something, that's one of the reasons they sort of do that. I don't know if that's the case in Puducherry also.
No, it is the same case everywhere because you see the policy, even today, the first 100 kilowatt hour, you know how much we pay? 150 rupees for 100 kilowatt hour, and when Better India came, people actually laughed at me when I set up the solar plant in 2001, starting with the AC of the electricity department. When I went to talk to him because I wanted to get permission, he said, is it lucrative? Is it viable? When I came up with the numbers, he just laughed at me. Why are you putting this system? So when you have these populist measures of providing first 100 kilowatt hour, if I'm using 500 kilowatt hour, why should I be paying a subsidized rate for the first 100 kilowatt hour? The whole system is going to change when you have, we have the slab tariffs. In many states, the tariff goes by slabs. The first 100 kilowatt hour, you pay a certain price, and the next 100 kilowatt hour, you pay another price, etc. But the fact is, if I'm able to pay, consume more, right from the beginning, I should be paying more. If that happens, that will bring in more efficiency. I look for alternatives because changing the lights and fans will be much more lucrative for me than going for electricity because it doesn't really hurt me to pay. The same thing with the solar. So the poor utilities are helpless because they are trapped between the government policy decisions and the end users. So obviously, the capital which comes in mostly for people, those who can afford, those who are paying high rate, they go for it because they do the economic calculation. They look at the payback period. And in spite of all that, you can see how many people have actually gone for solar system. In Puducherry itself, I can tell you, very few people, very few households have actually gone for solar system, in spite of the fact that there is a lot of awareness of it. Because people start calculating what is my payback period, and people are looking for payback period of 3 to 4 years. I mean, I asked them the same question. I decided not to have a car because I don't need a car. And if I do my calculations, I prefer to put my money in fixed deposit, and whenever I need a car, I can rent a car. And that comes out to be much cheaper. Because anybody who owns a car, if you do a calculation, is there any payback period? A car is more of a liability than an asset. So you can look at in our day-to-day life, many things are actually liabilities and they're not assets. And yet we continue because this has become a social norm. You rightly pointed out rooftop solar is an issue for utilities. Policies are there in place, but they don't encourage because they lose money. Okay? So unless we address this issue in a holistic manner, it is going to continue in the same way for, again, years to come. Even if, as you can see, as a result of which government is seeing much more success in solar plants of mega size. We're talking about 100 megawatt, 200 megawatt, but we haven't reached our target set for rooftop, which is about 40% of the share should come from rooftop. We haven't made much progress in that area. But to me, it makes much more sense because the moment I put solar on my rooftop, there is no transmission distribution losses. And in a country where we have transmission distribution losses, which can go up to, though it's improving with time, we still have about 15% or more transmission distribution losses in many utilities, many grids. So we can eliminate that. And I'm generating where I need it, and I'm helping my neighbors to improve the quality of electricity. We don't have voltage fluctuations, etc. So obviously it is an issue of policy. And as long as politics comes in policy, this is not going to change.
Yeah, but there is one thing about rooftop solar and, the point about distribution and transmission losses.
Yes.
Unless somebody does a analysis, I mean, there's something called, localized, essentially the value of this localization depends on various things. For instance, there is a lot of economy of scale in large solar PV plants. So there is that trade-off. Plus, the other thing is that when, people who are generating electricity in these distributed energy resources, they are also putting energy back on the grid. So there is some loss over there. So unless these kind of factors are taken into account, then it's hard to say which one is really, that is something that needs to be considered before saying that we are cutting down on transmission and distribution losses.
What happens actually, as I said, I produce 30 to 35% more electricity than we consume. Where does that go actually? It doesn't go back to the power plant. It is all remaining after the transformer. It does not go beyond the transformer. So as a result, the electricity that I feed into the grid is actually used by my neighbors. It doesn't go very far. So the amount of electricity that flows through the transformer actually reduces. So you do have transmission and distribution losses reduced because you don't need to have that much of electricity flowing in the whole system because you are taking care of the local requirements. You talked about the mega scale. Land is something that we haven't really looked into. And government is always looking at how to bring down the cost. I mean, I just don't understand how anybody who can produce electricity at 2 rupees something and sell it to the grid today, is it really in the long term viable? What are the economics of it? Where do you get the capital from? So in many cases, I give you the example of ESL, Energy Efficiency Services Limited. Where do they get the money from to do this business? When they take the money, are they paying the same rate as the private sector does? If you and I have to put up a house or buy something, we have to take the loan. We know how much interest rate that we pay. So there is no level playing field at different levels. Okay? Unless we address all these issues, and there have been many studies done to talk about this transmission distribution losses, and they show solar on-site definitely help. In fact, the whole approach in many developed countries is now to see going away from the mega systems to more decentralized, distributed energy generation, because that makes much more sense to cut down the losses and makes the grid much more reliable.
Okay, thank you.
Sir. Now I request Professor Naren Shah sir, to do the vote of thanks, and then we shall conclude with the session.
Yeah, Abhinav, this is normally a prerogative of the head, Professor Anand. I'm not sure he's there in the audience, but if not, then let me thank you, Brahmanand. I think I'm sure our students, those who were listening to you carefully, initially you proposed that it to be an interactive session, and there Professor Anand Rao, our head, said that it may not really succeed because our students are shy. You recall his email. That's what he said. But we would definitely like you to sort of call you back again in next semester, and then perhaps hopefully our students will be able to sort of you would be able to run in the fashion that you like the interactive session. And I remember you used to talk very passionately about rational use of energy, and maybe like those concepts of energy conservation and all that, because you couldn't touch upon all that you used to teach. I remember you used to cover this as a part of your course modules at AIT on rational use of energy. So with that, let me propose really a clap. I don't know how do you clap on the sort of online session, but thanks for giving this talk to our students, and we hope we can touch base with you again for a talk next semester. Yeah.
Thank you very much, and it's been my pleasure actually. And I've always loved whenever, even if I'm very busy, whenever I'm asked to talk to students, I'm very happy because you are the future. The future lies on how you decide things in different areas. Whether you become a technocrat, whether you join the government, in all areas you can make a difference if you understand the drawbacks and the right type of policies that can be developed. So I'd be very happy anytime to come back and interact with you. And I like the sessions to be more interactive because then we know exactly how far you are actually following whatever I say. At the same time, I also get a feedback as to where I need to emphasize more. I hope to have more interaction with you in future. And thank you very much for giving this opportunity to interact with all of you.